Welcome to the Principal Source audio presentation of Inner Life by Dr. Allan Blumenthal and Joan Mitchell Blumenthal. A philosophy of self-interest can only work to our benefit if we understand what is in our interest. While a code of ethics covers principles applicable to all human beings, the values of reason, purpose, and self-esteem, and the virtues required to obtain them, something else is needed to understand the specific, concrete interests of a given individual. How do we learn who we are as individuals? How do we understand the particular interests and values we hold that make our own lives worth living? What is the role of our inner lives? Allan Blumenthal and his wife, Joan Mitchell Blumenthal, show how a heightened awareness of our inner experience enriches the enjoyment of life. They argue that the achievement of happiness and self-esteem requires us to defeat the guilt and repression of our inner lives. Allan Blumenthal received his medical degree from the University of Toronto Medical School and is a practicing psychiatrist in New York City. Dr. Blumenthal also has a major second interest as a musician. He is a graduate of the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto and has performed professionally and lectured on music. Joan Mitchell Blumenthal is an accomplished painter and writer. Her paintings are exhibited in collections throughout the United States and Canada. She is a life member of the Art Students League and did graduate work in art history at New York University's Institute of Fine Arts. Their work on inner life is presented by Dr. Allan Blumenthal.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to have the opportunity to talk about a subject dear to my heart. From the first moment I became aware of inner life, and throughout the years I've been practicing psychotherapy and just plain living, I've seen it as a core issue in our psychological nature. It is a concept pertaining to every person's deepest emotional need, and is a major element in the enjoyment of life. I hope and I think you will understand why as the lecture progresses. We are only too aware of the many conditions and obligations that life imposes. From childhood, we are taught that it is our responsibility to be conscientious students, obedient children, loyal friends, productive members of our community, loving husbands or wives, thoughtful lovers, good parents, and so on. But little is said about, and few of us know the hows and whys of the satisfactions that actually fuel our daily lives. Yet without them, we would find life not worth living. These satisfactions fall into two categories that are not mutually exclusive. There are the fulfillments that result from external achievement, the feeling I did it, and the satisfactions arising from inner life experience, the feeling I am the person who did it. In this discussion, I'm going to concentrate on the person aspect, the experience of the self that gives rise to the awareness of identity, the sense of who one is and of what matters to oneself, the sense of oneself as the beneficiary of one's actions. First of all, let us consider the nature of personal identity. Put simply, identity is really the sum of those attributes that contribute to the sense of I-ness. They include genetic and environmental factors encompassing race, ethnic origin, sex, nationality, family, locale, health, and all other background considerations, and in addition, whatever free will choices the individual has made. Identity is extraordinarily complex. It has layers and facets, and is of course unique to every individual. No two individuals feel themselves to have exactly the same identity, not even identical twins. An individual's fundamental sense of identity is permanent. Its primitive form is undoubtedly developed in early childhood. Naturally, it becomes more sophisticated over time. Many child psychologists believe that personality and the basic sense of identity is well established by the age of 5, which of course is not to say that all change is impossible after that. Certainly during the early teen years, most children are asking themselves questions amounting to, who am I? And what really matters to me? These questions imply the recognition of the existence of a sense of self. the child is actually attempting to identify its nature. If he pursues it, he will find out how complex a job that is. When we examine the content of personal identity, we see that its components are the individual's values. In a real sense, we as individuals are the sum total of our values. Some of our values are essential for survival and well-being on the physical level. Some are required for psychological well-being. These are set by our nature as human beings and are objective. Unless we possess them, we cannot achieve fulfillment or happiness. The essential values, those that are not optional, are the values of character. Among them, rationality, independence of thinking, integrity, a sense of justice, honesty, generosity, and creativity. Other values derive equally from objective human needs, but can be satisfied in many different ways. These optional values are what we call personal values. Notice that such personal values may not feel optional to the individual who has chosen them. He may feel that without them, he wouldn't be himself. Personal values come in many forms. Among the more obvious are an individual's interests. As you know, there are interests and interests. Some individuals are interested in the arts, sports, or politics, but do not find them crucial to their sense of self. Others have a passion for these pursuits, and they are crucial to the sense of identity. For one individual, a game of tennis is merely exercise. For another, it is essential to his emotional well-being. Some find music to be a pleasant background for other activities. To others, it is an all-consuming, soul-fulfilling experience. Among interests, the choice of career is clearly one of the most significant. Because it engages most of an individual's time and effort, the career is likely to combine many of his personal values. I do want to say, however, that while career is crucial to identity, identity does not derive from career alone. Unfortunately, many people mistakenly identify their essential selves only with career. It is as if they think, I am an accountant or a lawyer or a financial consultant, and that is the essence of who I am. These individuals, frequently recognized as workaholics, do not have a solid experience of themselves except when they are working, an unhappy, even tragic state of affairs. I often hear about it from those who love them. Whoever is conscious of his thinking processes knows he has his own way of approaching issues, a characteristic way of coming at things. Whatever it is that he does mentally, he likes to do it and finds it a significant personal value. There are those for whom an important part of self-experience is functioning at a high level of abstraction, and those whose preferred mental functioning is at a more concrete level. Then again, there are those whose thinking is orderly, precise, and carefully structured, and those whose thinking is intuitive, unstructured, inspirational, and imaginative. There are, of course, all shades in between. In the case of the extremes, the preferred method of thinking may well lead one into science or mathematics, another into art. Some individuals enjoy the challenge of solving a problem moments before the deadline. For others, the most gratifying self-experience comes from organizing a meticulous presentation long before the work is due. And for both, there is the pleasure of feeling, I did it my way. Although we cannot change it, we value our individual temperament. Temperament is undoubtedly an inborn quality that is manifest at birth or even before. It pertains to an individual's characteristic rate, intensity, and quality of reactions and behavior. Some newborn infants are passive, docile, placid, and slow-moving, while others are active, assertive, intense, and demanding. These traits may well be the precursors of later individual characteristics that persist throughout life. For example, some adults are active and energetic, others passive and phlegmatic. Some are easily aroused, others slow to react. Temperament is such a crucial part of human nature that it is necessarily a significant component of an individual's sense of who he is. Personality is a similar and related issue. For some purposes, it is only a matter of convenience to separate them. Personality, in the colloquial, non-technical sense, is the outward form or manner of expressing the individual's unique constellation of values, outlook, and tastes. The extent to which our personalities are self-made or innate, as is the case with temperament, or influenced by environmental factors, is at present an open question. I do not believe it is possible, at our current level of understanding of human development and behavior, to know the answer. But whatever its source, personality is generally understood to be more at the surface than temperament, precisely because it refers to the manner of expression. Not to put too fine a point on it, when we say, for example, that an individual has an artistic temperament, we generally mean that he is sensitive, high-strung, easily upset, and given to rapid changes of mood. That is called artistic temperament because some people think that all real artists are like that. But when we say that an individual is artistic as a personality trait, we mean that he gives evidence of his concern with beauty and is specially sensitive to all the artistic means, such as movements, colors, words, and sounds. Personality is easy to peg. To name just a few possibilities, an individual may be predominantly outgoing and extroverted, or self-contained and introverted, humorous and lighthearted, or serious and dry, whimsical or literal, spontaneous or deliberate in behavior, dramatically expressive or guarded, affectionate or cool. How we feel about our temperament and personality is not always a simple matter. Considering that they are probably the given for each individual, it would seem that they should be accepted without moral judgment, that is, without congratulation or blame. And by and large, that's how it is. Most of us accept our personalities with the attitude, this is the way I am, and I value it. Even when there are exceptions to that easy acceptance, they are not across the board. No one dislikes his personality totally. No one can even think of himself as a whole without including much of the personality he possesses. In rare cases, however, there are aspects of the personality the individual does not love. I would say it's because he feels those aspects do not correctly represent the inner person. Because the problem area is not likely to be fundamental, it is possible in many cases to change whatever the individual feels to be his personality defect. I view this correction as overcoming a technical psychological problem rather than a basic one. For example, a shy person may deal with the particular self-doubts that gave rise to the shyness, and in time learn to be more outgoing. Although this improvement may please him, it is questionable whether or not his essential personality has changed. By now, you may have realized that the acceptance of temperament and personality is a component of basic self-acceptance. I have found that we're never far from that issue. Sooner or later, we must all learn to accept ourselves for what we are. Not to do so implies self-condemnation. It implies that we are not what we should be, and therefore are at fault. The notion of the shoulds as a moral demand and the resulting guilts are, I think, responsible for more psychological suffering than any other idea. What we should be is useful as a guide to self-improvement and the achievement of happiness, but not as a measure of self-worth. We do not live in order to pay homage to our concept of what we should be, so to speak, to satisfy the demands of the various gods of adequacy, the god of optimal productivity, the god of social skill, the god of sexual adequacy, the god of wit and charm, the god of encyclopedic knowledge, etc. Rather, if we are wise, we use the concept of should as a tool to help us organize, plan, and set goals toward the ultimate goal of fulfillment. Need it be said that accepting ourselves does not imply resignation to inadequacy, nor does it mean that we make no effort toward betterment. Self-acceptance is a necessary starting point on the road to any process of self-improvement and self-esteem. One's characteristic mode of feeling is yet another category of personal values. Some part probably has its basis in temperamental predisposition, but many other psychological factors and free will choices play an important role. Some individuals experience a broad range of emotions, from triumphant exultation to black despair. Some individuals experience a narrow range of emotions, from slightly cheerful to mildly disappointed. Some are stimulated only by catastrophic events, like the loss of an important job, while others react emotionally to the trembling of a falling leaf. And individuals differ in their characteristic moods. Some are habitually cheerful and optimistic, while others are habitually melancholic and pessimistic. Whatever our emotional mode and whatever its source, we value its many facets as part of our identity. Many other personal values derive from the particular manner in which we satisfy psychological needs. Among these is the need for human relationships, for companionship, love, and sex, for pleasurable consumption, for variety, for growth, for chosen purposes, for freedom, for creative activity, for solitude, and so on. Notice that these needs are abstract in nature, allowing for a wide range in the manner of fulfillment. Then, too, the degree of any one need varies from person to person and from time to time according to the individual's changing context. For example, we all need human relationships, but just where this need exists in the hierarchy of the total system varies with each individual. The status of this need, or for that matter any need, is a component of personal identity. Some need constantly to be surrounded by other people and to be interacting extensively with them. Others, whether they be loners or not, require much less human contact and or desire it with fewer people. Some individuals need a great deal of time to be alone, either to be in touch with their inner selves or to pursue solitary activities. Others require less. Some have a need to commune with nature. Some need time to immerse themselves in the arts. We all know people who are in heaven when they have a good book to read. For others, it is essential to be either a spectator or a participant in sports. Whatever the type and degree of the need, the individual must satisfy it in order to feel that he is himself and in his own universe. The experience of the particular manner and content of thought, feeling, and action that gives an individual a sense of personal identity, as I have described it, is what I mean by inner life. To repeat, inner life is the experience of the particular manner and content of thought, feeling, and action that gives an individual a sense of personal identity. To the individual, this inner life feels like a given and is experienced as an essential part of his existence. At this point, you may be wondering whether or not everyone has an inner life. As best we can tell, everyone has. To be sure, differing value structures assign it greater or lesser weight, such that some find external achievement more rewarding, while others see inner life as the most significant part of themselves, feeling that it is where they really live. Lest you think you hear detachment from reality or rampant subjectivism, I hasten to say that I am not speaking of substituting voyages into the inner life for eating, sleeping, and making a living. For sane men, inner life is an adjunct and an enhancement of ordinary daily activities. It runs parallel and interacts with the focus on external matters. You might also wonder if there is a difference in the inner life or the need for inner life in men as compared with women. It is probably true that women are more often and more deeply in touch with their feelings and emotional needs than men. But it is certainly an open question whether this difference is inherent in human nature or is merely the result of cultural conditioning. From my investigations into the inner lives of members of both sexes, I find no difference in the basic needs nor in the nature and importance of inner life experience. Whatever its degree, it is certain that some attention to inner life is a psychological necessity. It is a requirement for happiness and equally for self-esteem, as I shall explain. Because there is so much to gain, we would think that no one who could have a rich inner life would intentionally turn his back on it. Happiness, need it be said, is what we live for. As we experience the satisfaction of solving problems in our own personal style, as we fantasize the exhilarating thrill of sailing in a fresh wind, as we delight in the activity of setting the table with fine crystal, china, candles, and flowers, as we drift into the pleasures of our daydreams, as our minds wander from beloved music to related images, or as we make up variations on a favorite story, we experience the enjoyment of our kind of life. What we feel is like a benediction from ourselves. The cherished personal values of our inner life tell us that we are worthy beings, worthy of our dreams, worthy to know happiness. But if an individual is out of touch with his inner life and detached from its values, no matter how rational he is, how much in control, how efficacious, how successful, he is working for a cardboard man. If his deeply held personal values are unexperienced or considered irrelevant or non-objective, they have no power. They can do nothing to create happiness and self-esteem, and he is left with only duties and obligations. Without the experience of inner life, he is almost certain ultimately to develop psychological symptoms, including feelings of depersonalization, loss of motivation, passivity, fatigue, apathy, depression, and the loss of the ability to experience pleasure. To illustrate, what we know as the midlife crisis is often precipitated by the inner question, is this all there is? The missing elements are not worldly activities or possessions. Rather, there is a painful vacuum in the realm of feeling. The victim is tormented by concerns amounting to, why am I so unfulfilled? Why doesn't my life have more meaning? Why do I feel so empty? The real problem, more often than not, is the individual's failure to have developed his personal value system, his inner life. The solution is not to quit his job, not to divorce his wife, not to move to another state or country or continent. It is rather to attune himself to his actual personal needs and to enrich his inner life. Every man needs to fight to keep alive the inner vision that he knows to be his very soul. To do this, he must engage in the actual experience of inner life, and he must accept both the concern with and the content of inner experience as good. I repeat, he must engage in the actual experience of inner life, and he must accept both the concern with and the content of inner experience as good. We might imagine that with happiness and self-esteem at stake, the enemy that could defeat inner life must be an army of giants. It is not so. The enemy is two lightly veiled ghosts with the power to frighten. The first one is an old sadistic acquaintance called guilt. He challenges the inner life to exist while there are in the real world problems to be solved, obligations to be honored, self-indulgences to be stifled, desires to be squelched. In the face of one's duties, guilt says, How dare you indulge yourself in the purely pleasurable, non-productive waste of time? Some do not dare. They do not ask for proof that virtue belongs only to the non-dreamers. Someone, somewhere, has asserted that it does, and they feel guilty. Men cannot tolerate too much guilt. To escape it, some will banish their precious dreams in favor of a supposedly virtuous, but increasingly gray existence. The second malevolent ghost is one most of us know well and are always fighting. This enemy is called repression. Repression is the automatic subconscious process by which an individual blocks conscious awareness of particular mental content. It is a defense mechanism designed to shelter him from the pain arising from any idea, belief, conclusion, or feeling that conflicts with his conscious convictions, his moral self-image, or the desires he considers unrealistic, impractical, or unachievable. It is as if the individual is saying to himself, I don't need love, or I don't care about being understood, or I don't really love music that much. If the effect of repression is to prevent access to relevant mental content, the purpose is to block the painful feelings that content arouses. There is, of course, no way to block the experience of negative emotions without blunting the positives. Consequently, repression impairs the ability to experience unmixed happiness. Most repression begins in early childhood. It is usually a reaction to disappointment, frustration, and pain caused by the failure of significant adults to respond appropriately to the child's expressions of interest, enthusiasm, and joy. The child generalizes. He concludes that his personal values are alien to others, and that the responses he wants are unrealistic and not to be realized. Subconsciously, he stifles these desires, and little by little, the mechanism of repression leads him to be virtually unaware of his lost values. This, in turn, diminishes his capacity for happiness. Some degree of repression is almost universal, and inner life is particularly vulnerable. Inner life, a realm felt to be made of amorphous and indefensible emotions, cannot withstand the destructive force of repression. As a practicing psychiatrist, I have every reason to know about that. In dealing with psychological problems, it is necessary for me, or any therapist, to make a diagnosis and to define what is known as the psychodynamics of the problem, the ideas, values, feelings, etc., that lead to the emotional conflict. But this constitutes merely the mechanical or technical aspect of knowing a patient. To really know the person, one has to know something of his inner life. When explaining inner life, I find that patients usually understand the concept, but most really have to work to recognize examples of their own inner experience. And almost everyone is uncomfortable talking about it, not just patients, but people at large. Most individuals seldom discuss their personal feelings with friends or even with lovers. To the extent they do, they often feel embarrassed. They feel that their personal emotional experiences or the activities they pursue predominantly for self-experience are excessive or silly, that they bear no relation to the real world and are not likely to be understood by others. Here are some concrete examples. A friend, visibly shaken following a performance of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony, made a confession. Whenever I hear the Ode to Joy, he said, I am always moved to tears. I can't stop myself from sobbing out loud. Clearly embarrassed, he felt sure that I would laugh at him and think him weird. Another example. A patient, reluctantly and with a red face, confessed that he actually enjoyed preparing his annual income tax. It turned out that what he really liked was compiling neat columns of figures and organizing the material beautifully. For him, that was an aesthetic experience. Clearly, he expected me to think this was pathological. As it turned out, he was wrong. Neat columns of figures happens to be one of my own things. I knew what he felt, and I experienced a sense of kinship. In response to probings into her inner life, another patient, a tennis pro, told me that one of her most profoundly personal experiences was watching the arc of a spinning tennis ball flying across the net. Again, it was an aesthetic experience, not directly tied to ability in the game of tennis itself. This time I had no identification with the particular experience. No matter how beautiful its spin, a tennis ball has no personal meaning to me. But I did know what she meant. I have equivalent concretes of my own, so that I could both understand and empathize. Often, the embarrassment over these personal reactions is related to the apparent insignificance of the event that gives rise to a big inner life experience. The individual fails to understand that it is not merely the concrete event to which he is responding, but rather the abstract values represented by the concrete. The neat column of figures represents the wider value of order. The tennis ball sailing through the air evokes the feeling of unrestricted movement or freedom. Repression, leading to guilt, discomfort, and embarrassment over inner life experiences, may cause a person to avoid activities that produce those responses. I have known individuals who permit themselves what they consider indulgence in personal life pleasures only after they have completed their official duties. It is as if they have to pay penance in advance of their sin. Some go so far as to ration the activities they especially enjoy. I knew a young lady who loved looking at store windows, not just to shop, but as a pleasurable experience in itself. Feeling this to be an indefensible self-indulgence, she used her stopwatch to allot herself 30 seconds per window as she proceeded down Fifth Avenue. You see from these examples that guilt, repression, and embarrassment are possible hazards of being in touch with inner life. I want to convince you that it's worth the risk. We are fortunate that the sources of inner life experience are many and varied. They are also big and little. We'll begin with the big ones: human relationships and art. Human relationships are potentially the source of the greatest joy and the greatest sorrow. I need not dwell further on the frustrations and disappointments experienced by people of all ages at the hands of family and friends. The pain becomes more acute when romantic partners are involved, and agony in the event of the death of a loved one. Yet it is difficult to imagine that were we alone in the universe, we would care to survive, much less work and play. We need the company of others to share ideas and values of every kind. It is obvious that we need families, that we do not choose them, but that other things being equal, we will feel a special affection for them. But where we do choose, as in the case of friends, we start with no predisposition. We look first for the values of character we admire, then for ideas mutually held, and for personal affinities. Because we share with friends a similar outlook, what they experience and recount to us augments our own awareness and understanding. When we are in the company of friends, or even when we think of them, our lives take on a positive cast. It makes us happy to be able to like and to love. Enjoying friendships gives us the dual experience of being both valued and valuer. This is a crucial inner life experience we need. It must be said that there are no one-way streets in friendship. Each party must have and give a roughly equal understanding and appreciation of the other. Friendships languish if they are not between equally conscious and equally appreciative people. I'm sure you have noticed that friends give us the opportunity to experience ourselves in many different ways, according to the type of relationship, how close it is, and how much we are accepted and liked for what we are. We recognize that with different people, we are put in touch with different aspects of ourselves, and even with the same people, we experience different aspects of ourselves at different times. Naturally, we feel closest to those who make us feel the most understood. Just as we may feel understood in friendship, we may also feel very misunderstood. Compliments and comments, no matter how well intended, may miss the mark of what actually matters to us at the time. As grateful as we are for the compliment, we cannot help but feel a little disappointed. Suppose, for example, I have just performed a piece of music, and I am still wrapped up in its mood. One friend compliments me on the delicate shadings of a particular passage. Another tells me he likes my new suit. It is clear, isn't it, that only one of them is giving me a valuable sense of myself. The other one means well, but he is not in the place I care about at that moment. Or suppose an acquaintance tells me I am sensitive. Do I understand that he sees me as responsive to subtle stimuli? Or that my feelings are easily hurt? Or that I am aware of and sympathetic to the feelings of others? One meaning will please. Another may alienate me. What will please me is the compliment that actually touches the way I experience myself. It makes me feel closer to the giver. Naturally, there are endless variations within what we call friendships. In some, the parties see each other frequently, enjoying detailed discussions of life events or shared inner life experiences like movies, museums, or walks in the country. Even if there is little conversation about the shared experience, it feels good to know that your friend has emotional reactions similar to your own. And if the reactions are subtly different, that too is interesting and revealing. We neither want nor expect carbon copies of ourselves. Small differences within a broad context of agreement are like musical variations on a theme. Some friends see each other infrequently and have fewer or less intense discussions. If what has passed between them on the prior meetings seems to be forgotten, the sense of who each is strained. By contrast, the friendship remains intact when even after a long interval without contact, they feel they are picking up where they left off, as if there had been no interruption. Another shared inner life experience is what we might call the sound of silence. In most good relationships, there is no need for incessant conversation. Periodic silence is felt as companionable, peaceful, and reassuring. It is understood as a total acceptance, each of the other. Sometimes two people do not want to speak, for example, after a deeply moving aesthetic experience. This happens when what has been shared is felt to be beyond words. Good friends know better than to dilute profound moments. The phenomenon of old friends seems to be a special case. Where there are shared memories, we feel an understanding and a continuity of common values that is very satisfying. Good old friends enjoy saying, "Remember when," because they know they are sharing not just a memory, but their feelings about it. We are gratified when a friend knows what our life, our work, people, nature, art, and a million small things mean to us. Our own enjoyment is magnified when we can exchange thoughts with and express our feelings to another. This way of relating is a precious, inimitable experience. All human beings yearn for it. It has been rightly said that if one has a friend, one is rich indeed. In the hierarchy of human relationships, romantic love stands first. Love is a matchless value, both crucial and irreplaceable, and at its best, it arouses in lovers the emotion of ecstasy. Although romantic love requires that each partner possess certain values and virtues, Alone they are not sufficient. We admire rationality, we respect intelligence, but we are not in love with them in the romantic sense. What we fall in love with is a particular combination of the optional, personal values of the outer and inner person. The mutual knowledge and appreciation of these values is the basis of the intimacy experienced in romance. We could say that romance is the most intimate sharing of inner lives. The experience of self is unique in both the giving and receiving of love. On the receiving end, one gets in words, glances, and touches an appreciation of the innermost self, of the qualities partly or wholly hidden from other eyes. On the giving end, one experiences oneself as highly aware, sensitive, and appreciative of subtle values possessed by the other. Together, lovers experience the pleasure of exclusivity that, if put into words, would be, I alone know who you are. You alone know who I am. We are both wise and wonderful. That is the nature of the bond that is love. Although it proves to be fragile in some cases, in others, it is more powerful than any force on earth. Even though it is not necessarily true, love is often experienced as delightfully improbable, which only stresses its value. Each lover feels that it is strange and almost magical that he or she has in this enormous world found a soulmate who sees, understands, and agrees with the deepest qualities one values in oneself. The intimacy between lovers is experienced and expressed in many ways. There are knowing looks, shared secrets of inner life, significant silences, and above all, sex. At its best, sex is an expression of freedom without boundaries or barriers. It is mysterious. Lovers do not know why the most intimate aspects of physical pleasure are so emotionally meaningful, but they do know that it is so. Each feels himself as a totality of mind and body, united with a kindred soul in the unfettered pursuit of intense pleasure. All that one is and wants to be is embodied in the mounting tensions of sexual desire. The climax is experienced as the achievement of a radiant soul basking in perfect joy. As the sexual rhythm subsides, the warmth of sharing is magnified. The tenderness of romantic love is felt as a blessing on two souls who know their own worth, the worth of the other, and the beauty of their world. Poetry is challenged by the union of spirit and flesh we call romantic love. When men and women yearn for romance, they are yearning for the exalted feeling of being really alive. They long for a life in which everything from a smile to a sigh, to the achievement of a most cherished dream, is infused with shared values and emotions. They long for a life in which things matter. Everyone has an inner life where the romantic attitude is born and nourished. Some are lucky enough to share it with a lover. Although friendship and love offer the greatest potential for self-experience, other types of relationships contribute to our inner lives. Our predominantly functional relationships with doctors, lawyers, hairstylists, accountants, waiters, doormen, and taxi drivers, etc., allow us to experience ourselves in relation to mankind at large. If in these relationships we give and expect such qualities as courtesy, thoughtfulness, respect, and generosity, it indicates one view of mankind. If we treat relationships as exclusively functional, if nothing matters except efficiency, that indicates another view. Similarly, our regard for strangers reflects our metaphysical estimate of the human race. Do we feel goodwill? Do we agree with Anne Frank that in spite of everything, people are good at heart? Or do we characteristically feel distrust and suspicion on principle? Do we or do we not feel an affinity with our fellow human beings? Is our fellow man an inner life value, a neutral, or a disvalue? The degree of courtesy, thoughtfulness, respect, and generosity we habitually display towards strangers tells us what we think of the human race, and equally what sort of persons we ourselves are. After all, civilized social values are natural to men of self-esteem. Most men do value the feeling of affinity with strangers. For example, those of us who love animals enjoy looking at the puppies and kittens in the windows of pet shops. Usually, we are surrounded by strangers experiencing emotions similar to our own. At such moments, we are not concerned with their views on politics, economics, or religion. Instead, we feel that we share an important and meaningful value. It makes for a bond and gives us the experience of our own goodwill. I said earlier that romantic love and sex offer the possibility of the greatest joy. The nearest thing to that potential is art. While for some, art is merely pleasant, for many, it gives rise to intense self-experience. It is no accident that the impetus toward the creation and appreciation of art is as old as man. It is believed that all civilizations have produced and enjoyed some form of music, painting, sculpture, storytelling, or dance. Art probably began, at least partly, in service to religion, but it came to be valued for its own sake. Why? Because it satisfies a deep psychological need. From the creator's point of view, the line from inner life to art is direct. All art is created from the artist's desire to project some aspect or aspects of reality, but in a selective form that emphasizes what he considers the most meaningful statements his medium allows. The artist's motivation comes from his own personal blend of values. The response to art follows the reverse track. The work arouses emotional reactions via the values we see in it. I stress emotional reactions because that is the way art works. It is not intended for propaganda, but for enjoyment. Sometimes, as in great art, the emotional reaction follows the exposure to the work so quickly that we have to think hard to identify the underlying values, if we want to do that. For the sake of this discussion, let's do a little light identifying to see what qualities can emerge from art. For example, let's identify the qualities in the work of two composers, Mozart and Tchaikovsky. For the most part, the music of Mozart is structured, orderly, well-proportioned, and balanced. It is also sprightly, sweet, lyrical, and elegant. The music of Tchaikovsky is predominantly large-scale, stirring, colorful, and flamboyant. It has sweep, pathos, and grandeur. The total effect characteristic of each composer is markedly different, and while any of us can find a responsive chord to certain elements in each composer, probably, from a point of view of affinity, we lean toward one or the other. Now let's contrast the painting styles of Vermeer and Van Gogh. Vermeer's paintings are orderly and carefully composed. A consistent light source illuminates the dimensionally rendered forms, which are painted in luminous, harmonious colors. The paint texture is dictated by the subject elements. The effect in general is stable and serene. By contrast, Van Gogh is not concerned with a measurable, stable space, but rather one that is active and within which the entities shift and swirl. He paints in harshly contrasting or else surprising combinations of color. His brushstroke is not descriptive. It has a life of its own. Van Gogh envelops all of nature in a pulsing, churning movement that reflects an emotionally charged inner state. Again, I think most people, however much they admire both artists, will feel a greater affinity with one or the other. The point is that we sense through all styles of art a constellation of values that reaches our own sense of things to a greater or lesser degree. Works of art are valuable to us if they reinforce our view of existence in any or all its many aspects. We need to keep ourselves open to art. We need to immerse ourselves in art for the sake of a powerful experience of what matters to us and of what we are capable of feeling. Sometimes we are surprised by the quality and depth of our aesthetic reactions. Often we find unsuspected sympathies, feelings of aspiration beyond any we knew we had, or a glow of inspiration that is almost religious in quality. Many have confessed that they feel reverence before Michelangelo's David, who is not a god, but a man of courage. We have cried at the self-sacrifice of heroes in the arts, because we adore such devotion to values. Art gives us 1,000 visions of an existence larger than life, or a tiny microcosm infused with the most subtle shadings of exquisite beauty. Through art, we discover and appreciate qualities and capacities, often almost hidden from ourselves. Those who respect inner life are very grateful that artists have given us something unique to contemplate. Earlier, I said that there are two sources of inner life experience, big and little. We have discussed the most important of the big ones, human relationships and art. I want now to consider some of the little sources. Everyday ordinary actions and reactions bring hundreds of opportunities to experience aspects of the self. For a given person, any activity may be merely pleasurable or may gratify the soul. Let's take a look at some apparently mundane activities that have potential for inner life experience. Planning a vacation trip. If one pays attention to how one prepares for a trip, one may discover personal satisfaction at every stage of the preparation. Some well-organized individuals read a great many travel books and guides in order to decide where they want to go. They create a schedule for each day, including sights to see, items to be purchased, restaurants to be tried, and leisure time to digest what they have seen. They make notes on items to be packed, they get foreign currency, and they make arrangements to be at the airport 2 hours before the departure time. Other travelers phone the travel agent at the last minute and ask her to choose somewhere to go that they haven't already been. They pack a toothbrush and whatever happens to be back from the dry cleaners and slide out to the airport, arriving minutes before takeoff. The first has an optimal self-experience as a careful planner who doesn't want to miss anything. The more casual type has an optimal experience of himself as a spontaneous, free spirit looking for adventure. Each makes the most of the experience by recognizing his own characteristic and preferred mode of functioning. Playing games. For some, winning at games is the point of playing. They must win, and figuratively speaking, they will kill to win. For others, games are just for fun. It doesn't matter whether they win or lose. The must-win guy satisfies his competitive needs. The just-for-fun guy experiences himself as a sportsman. Each enjoys his own brand of self-experience. Reading a novel. Some read slowly, carefully, savoring every word, enjoying every nuance, every figure of speech. Others read quickly, skimming over descriptive passages, getting the gist, but basically concerned with knowing how it all comes out. The careful reader satisfies aesthetic needs. The speed demon satisfies his desire to grasp the essentials and run. Taking a shower. What are the possibilities? Some bathe systematically, scrubbing from top to bottom and reaching for the towel as quickly as possible. Others take it easy, enjoying the warmth and relaxation. For the first, it is an exercised inefficiency. For the second, a sensuous experience. Taking care of oneself, eating right, exercising, going for regular checkups with the doctor or dentist gives some individuals a sense of control over their lives. It's not merely an oversight for many who neglect these items. Believe it or not, some individuals like to see themselves as unconcerned with physical matters. The attitude towards grooming and dress is similar. The range is from an almost compulsive preoccupation with fashion and achieving the right look, to pride in the degree of disinterest, not to say carelessness. Aptitudes. Various aptitudes provide an opportunity for awareness of emotionally meaningful skills. For example, I'm good at mathematics and I like that about myself. Or, I'm not good at mathematics and I like that about myself. Or I'm good at money management. Or I'm mechanically proficient. Or I'm good with people. Or I'm artistic, etc. Everything that one says about oneself is relevant to one's value system. Other sources of inner life experience include the way an individual characteristically walks, whether he strides purposefully or saunters, or the way he feels about food, whether it is a pleasure or a necessary evil, or the way he converses, whether he enjoys philosophical conversations or gossipy ones, or his attitude towards animals, nature, and the environment. Some people love to shop for beautiful things, even if they cannot actually buy them. Some stretch the budget to purchase something extravagant and glamorous, but not really needed, except for the pleasure of experiencing the world it evokes. And there are some wonderful examples of activities pursued almost obsessively, in which we see the inner life need dominating the practical needs. For example, a woman who is passionately interested in books owns a large collection. Often she rearranges her books, sometimes by subject, sometimes by size, and rarely by necessity. Continuous reorganization of her library for efficiency is really just an excuse. What she actually wants is the almost sensuous pleasure of handling her beloved objects, which is of course an inner life experience. Here's another example very close to home. Many years ago, when my wife and I were moving into a new apartment in a different city, the living room was filled almost to the ceiling with packing cartons. Virtually nothing had been unpacked. In the middle of this chaos, I found my wife sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully labeling her spice jars. It would be weeks until we would have a usable kitchen, but by reason of her artistic priorities, this is what she chose to do. Some activities are undertaken exclusively for inner life experience. Among them are hobbies, whether it be stamp collecting, playing a musical instrument, or gardening. The goal is to experience a creative type of pleasure usually not found in one's career. The ideal hobby puts one in touch with personal values that include one's interests, aptitudes, and style of thinking. There's yet another activity designed exclusively for inner life experience. I call it staring into space, or if you like, daydreaming. It consists of allowing one's mind to drift, pushed and pulled by random thoughts, by free associations, feelings, desires, and memories. While this process is an important stage in creative thinking, it does not require a productive purpose. It is self-justifying because it helps one be in contact with his inner self, and perhaps to discover new things about himself. Of course, it is pathological to spend most of one's time staring into space. I'm not recommending it in place of eating, sleeping, and working. Never underestimate the role of memories in self-experience. What we remember is tied emotionally to something that matters to us deeply. A woman once told me that when she was a little girl, too young to go out in the evening, her mother would come in to kiss her good night before going to a concert or party. Her mother wore a fur coat that smelled of a particular perfume. Now, 50 years later, the woman feels a kind of excitement, a sense of something glamorous about to happen whenever she smells that perfume. We are joined by memory to hundreds of events throughout our lives, events that touch us at the core of our being and give us the sense of continuity an integrated life requires. We've discussed many examples of inner life experiences, their sources and meaning. Now let us look at some of the means of accessing inner life and of augmenting contact with our inner selves. The first is the development and improvement of introspective skills. Introspection is the process of cognition directed inward to the state of one's consciousness. Its purpose is to identify one's method of mental functioning and/or mental content, the values, ideas, judgments, conclusions, and emotions operative at a given time. In the context of inner life, our concern is primarily with identifying feelings, recognizing their personal significance, assessing our comfort level, and allowing ourselves as full an experience as possible. The technique of identifying feelings is essentially that of asking questions. First, we should realize that we are always feeling something. The feeling meter is never really at neutral. If we think we feel nothing, a few questions will usually tell a different story. We start by finding out if our feeling is negative or positive. Then, because feelings are usually complex mixtures, we try to identify the various sub-feelings. We do not just feel sad, but rather combinations of such elements as unfulfilled, frustrated, yearning, empty, lonely, alienated, melancholic, apathetic, depressed, pessimistic, etc. We do not just feel happy, but rather mixtures of emotions such as gratified, fulfilled, satisfied, enthusiastic, exhilarated, euphoric, optimistic. To gain access to inner life experience, it is obviously helpful if we are able to identify the particular shadings of a given feeling. Here's an example showing how a psychotherapist might direct the question-asking process pertaining to inner life. The patient is a serious-looking young man. Therapist: could you give me an example of a recurring experience or activity that is emotionally meaningful to you? Patient, after a long pause: I like riding my motorcycle along deserted country roads. How does it make you feel? Happy. Just happy? Anything else? Well, kind of excited, strong. And what else? Well, perhaps a little wistful, too. It's a strange combination. Tell me, if you can, what the ride means to you. It gives me a sense of freedom and power, and a feeling of optimism, like the world is a wide-open place. Do you like to have anyone else along? Oh, no. I'd rather be alone. I enjoy being alone. It makes me feel self-sufficient and not needy. What about the wistful part? How do you account for that? I don't really know, but it's there all right. What do you mean by wistful? Well, maybe a little lonely, and perhaps a little sad. But somehow I don't mind feeling that. Funny, isn't it? You can see how many feelings and conflicts have been revealed by these few questions, and how much of the inner life. Feelings are even more complex than I have said. In fact, when we have a feeling, we always have at least one or more related feelings. First, we have the feeling. Then we have a feeling about the feeling amounting to an estimate of the original feeling. This means that we must ask, is this a transient emotion of no great significance to my inner life? Or is it important to me that I feel this particular emotion? Does it relate to my sense of myself? If it does, we must then establish what could be called the comfort level. We must ask, am I entirely at ease with this feeling or not? If there is discomfort, it is important to ascertain the ideas or attitudes causing it. Does the feeling seem morally offensive? Do I think I shouldn't be feeling this? Or do I feel that the feeling is excessive, foolish, unrealistic? Whatever the negative reaction to the emotion, we must think it through, decide whether or not the reaction is justified, and settle the issue. I should say that these negative judgments cannot be eliminated by a single re-evaluation. They must be dealt with repeatedly. The popular analogy between the workings of the human mind and computer programming breaks down here. To reprogram an error, the computer programmer has to make changes only once in the relevant commands. By contrast, in mental reprogramming, the corrections have to be made many times. The process consists of unlearning and relearning, like breaking any habit. The more often one consciously deals with negative ideas, ideas probably held from childhood, the sooner they are reprogrammed. Returning to the earlier example, when the therapist asked the patient how he felt about his emotional reactions, the young man admitted that they embarrassed him. I don't think it's right to want to be alone as much as I do, and it's strange that I need a motorcycle to make me feel optimistic and free. Anyway, I don't ride my bike much anymore. If this young man is to live with himself comfortably and happily, he will have to work to understand the nature of his feelings and conflicts, to recognize how they operate, to reprogram the relevant underlying ideas, and to accept his inner life. I think it's a good idea for all of us to do spot checks on feelings in the course of everyday events, to notice whether or not a given activity provokes a significant personal reaction. Frequent awareness of these particular reactions tends to automate the recognition of inner life experience in general. Ultimately, one no longer has consciously to make oneself aware of inner life. It becomes part of routine self-awareness. I want to stress that although introspection yields the identification of feelings and our attitudes towards them, introspection per se is not the ultimate goal. What we want is to be directly in touch with our sense of self-feelings, to actually experience them. We need to learn how to surrender to them, to feel what we feel without guilt, without inhibition, without restriction. We want to be able to revel in the emotional experience of self. We have another way of increasing inner life experience, something that requires no special training. We can pursue those activities that we know evoke sense of self reactions. Put simply, we can do the things we love to do. Listen to music, visit museums, play baseball, lunch at a special place, walk in the woods or along the beach, skip stones in a pond, gather flowers, buy a purple balloon, dance the tango, Play frisbee with the dog. Look for shapes in the clouds. Stare into space. Meditate. Do yoga, or whatever. To feel what we want to feel about ourselves, we must make these activities a regular part of living. The need to experience ourselves is an everyday affair. A walk on the beach once a year is not enough. And remember that inner life is not a guilty secret to be hidden from your own eyes or from the eyes of those you love. Talk to friends. Share your inner life with them. Let them know how you feel about them. Allow yourself to feel the joy of mutual understanding. Let yourself love and be loved. And above all, let yourself be yourself. It's what you've always wanted.